The year is 2018, and Kerr 9000 launches the next in the series of Megadrive reviews. In a freak mishap, Kerr 9000 is blown out of his reviewing trajectory, and this returns him to a review he did 8 years ago.
I've been reviewing games, writing blogs and making YouTube videos for quite a long time now, and there are a few games which I find myself repeatedly returning to. One of these is Buck Rogers' Countdown to Doomsday. I made a YouTube video about it many years ago, and I've talked about it several times on my blog. I guess there's some reason that I keep returning to it. Even before all of this, I have had a long history with the game. It was one of only a handful of games that I ever actually rented for the Megadrive. In fact, Megadrive Genesis-wise, I think I only rented about 4 games, and all of these were before I owned an actual Megadrive, and they were rented alongside a rental console. The main thing that drew me to Buck Rogers' Countdown to Doomsday was the name. I grew up watching the old Buck Rogers show when it was rerun on Saturday afternoons, as well as things like Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek, Lost in Space, Doctor Who and Blake 7. Watching science fiction shows and movies was the main way I spent time with my dad. Usually he'd get home from work after working long hard hours and he wouldn't have the energy left to play ball or do something like that, so we'd watch science fiction together. Heck, watching sci-fi stuff is pretty much still the main way we hang out with each other. So basically I was well in the know about just how cool a certain Buck Rogers was and how awesome his universe was, and that made me go, I want a piece of that, I want to shoot bad guys and go to space. I still think Buck is cool to this day, even though I later learned that he didn't swear on TV during a space dogfight like I believed he had when I was a kid. During an episode of the show, he asked a pilot if there was something wrong with your funkin' wagnalls, which I heard is as, there's something wrong with your fucking wagnalls.
If you call that interfering, there's something wrong with your fucking wagnalls.
I don't know what you mean by that, but how'd you like to repeat that in the flight hangar?
I'd love to.
I had no idea what a wagnall would be, but I basically believed he was cussing the guy out, and he was so cool that he could get away with it during daytime television. For those wondering what funkin' wagnalls means, it's basically an American brand of dictionaries and encyclopedias. So it was sort of a way of him saying, hey, do you know what you're actually on about? Okay, so that's enough about me and the TV show. Let's move on to the game. Well, the game was an RPG set in the Buck Rogers universe. It was developed by Strategic Simulations and published by Electronic Arts, and it came out in 1991. During the Megadrive's glory years, EA was responsible for porting a large number of games across to the Megadrive from the PC and Amiga. Personally, I think this was great, as it opened up console players to a world of games which had previously been merely the domain of home computer users. Buck Rogers was made on a very famous game engine called Goldbox, which was used for the classic Dungeons & Dragons series of games from the 80s and 90s. If you've played any of the Forgotten Realms games, then you'll have played something which uses this engine. I have to admit that when I hired it, I didn't know that it was a role-playing game, in all honesty. I didn't know exactly what I was getting myself into. I think I just expected some action type of game, a bit of shooting and, well, something a lot simpler than this, basically. What I was met with was the ability to make my own team of individuals and to then enter a conflict which was taking place in the world from one of my favourite TV shows. From this point on, though, the game was just the gift that kept on giving. Okay, so to go back to the beginning, you start the game by making a party of 6 characters. It's all based on dice rolls, really. You make the characters one at a time, and you do it by choosing the characters' races, genders and classes, and then you basically do a digital dice roll for HP, attack, power, defense, etc. You can do this again and again though until you get the result you want. Then you name your creation, choose an on-screen sprite to represent them, and finally use some assigned points to train them in the skills of your choices, including things such as tactics, perception, stealth, demolition. If you're anything like me, then you'll probably rip names off from other games or TV shows. I frequently used names like Kirk and Spot when growing up, as well as the names of various Transformers. Still, it helps the game in the long run because you get really attached to the little guys and you can't stand the thought of them dying. Very few games have made me feel this close to my characters and this concerned for their welfare, and those games would be things from the XCOM and Fire Emblem sort of lines. So, you don't usually get this kind of close feeling to your men. At first, after having made my squad of 6, I was walking around an isometric game environment getting into random battles, which are handled in a turn-taking way. First you move and attack, and then the enemy does the same, and this repeats until someone's won the battle. Usually what I try to do is get all of my men to focus on the enemies one by one. Because I basically figure, if there's 6 of us and there's 6 of them, well, if I can kill one, then there's only 5 firing at me. And it seems to work. Anyway, once you've got them done after the battle, you have the chance to root through your enemy's remains in the hopes of finding something good in the spoils of war, or you can just grab absolutely everything to sell it on later. When you finish a couple of missions, you're given the ability to pilot your own ship around the universe. Well, that's when the game really begins to open up more. It really stopped feeling like just a game and became a sort of second life. And it pulled me in the way that only the best games do. The story grabbed a hold of me, and it pulled me into the universe itself. The funny thing was, I had an Amiga in the house as a kid, and I have learned that since this game was actually available on the Amiga, but at the time I didn't realise that. And basically, Buck Rogers' Countdown to Doomsday became one of the reasons I wanted to own a Megadrive. I originally wanted to own one because my brother's friend had brought a Japanese imported one into the house with a handful of games, but Buck Rogers really sealed the deal for me. Okay, so I think I need to talk at least a little bit about the game's sound and graphics. So let's start with the sound. The music is rather basic. In fact, most of it is made up of very short repeating tunes, which a lot of people would probably find grating. But in all honesty though, I kind of like the music. Yes, it's basic, yes, it's repetitive, but it also fits the tone of the game. It's action-packed and dramatic when it needs to be. There are a lot of different sound effects, and each and every weapon has its own crack, buzz or sizzle noise. A rocket pistol sounds different to a laser pistol, for instance. There's even a tiny bit of digitised speech here and there in the game, which for its time in a game of this scope on a cart has to be admired. The graphics are about as basic as you can get, but they work. They're basic but highly functional and full of nice little touches. There's some great still frame comic style scenes shown at certain points to tell the game's story. And I particularly like the ones on an early mission when you're on what you think's a deserted spaceship. It has quite a nice survival horror level to it, that. Well, I like to talk about playing this game on an American and English machine, and to be honest, with this being a strategy game, I didn't really notice any difference when trying this game at 50 and 60 Hz. I guess the speed difference is more of a deal when you're playing games which have a fast pace to them. Okay, so it's time to score this game. I'm going to give this game 10 out of 10. Yes, the graphics could have been better, the music could have been better, but the game itself is so good that once you get into it, none of this matters. This game is one of a kind on the system. There's nothing else quite like it, and I recommend this to everyone. I kind of see this game as a sort of Mass Effect for the Megadrive. As though the games have different styles, they have a very similar feel. I'd have loved this game to either get a sequel or an updated remake on a later console. Actually, while talking about sequels, there was a PC-only sequel, which I've heard mixed things about. It's actually considered abandonware, so you can download it and play it on your PC using DOSBox, perfectly legally. I do wish, though, that some enterprising individuals would try to use the engine behind Countdown to Doomsday to construct a Megadrive ROM based on its PC sequel. I know someone will say, why don't you do it if you're so into the game? But this is something far beyond both my time and, more importantly, skill. As much as I love games, I've never understood a thing when it comes to how they are made. It's just my brain doesn't understand it. They might as well be made by fairies clapping or wizards waving their wands. If you fancy giving the game a bash yourself, then you can expect to pay around £10 for a loose cart, with boxed copies usually starting about £15. I really feel this game's worth the cash and worth your time. I strongly recommend that if you have a Mega Drive and you fancy playing something a little bit different, go get Buck Rogers. And if it seems a bit basic at first, just stick with it. I really do not think you'll regret it. Thank you.